Hello everyone. I am going to be talking about the content in Chapter 7, which is called or entitled Creating High Quality Environments. And obviously we're looking at creating high quality environments for children. We've already mentioned in our class the Georgia DECAL, Georgia Department of Early Care and Learning website. We've looked at two specific things. One of them is the rules for child care learning centers, and that is our guide or our rules for high quality child care in our state. We've also looked at GELDS, which is the Georgia Early Learning and Development Standards, and those are the GELDS are the standards that you as an early childhood educator would be referring to when you work with children birth through age 5, which is the preschool level in our state. Can you remember the 5 domains from GELDS? You all looked at one of them for the assignment. You looked at the physical development and motor skills domain, more specifically, in the webinar. There are 4 more. Another one is called social and emotional development. The 3rd one is approaches to play and learning. The 4th one is communication, language, and literacy. And the 5th one is cognitive development and general knowledge. And I say all that because I want you to know that those are standards that, like I said, you as a qualified teacher or early childhood educator would be going to if you're working with children birth through age 5 in the state of Georgia. And now, at the opening of Chapter 7, I mentioned all that because at the very beginning of Chapter 7, it says, careful attention should be given to creating physical, cognitive, and psychological settings for children. And that's exactly what our GELDS is talking about. Another thing that's mentioned at the beginning of Chapter 7, and I'm going to mention it again because we talked about this one when we were in the first 3 chapters of health, I believe, the factors that influence a child's growth and development. Do you remember what they are? There are 2, and I'm going to give you a hint. Environment and heredity. Those 2 factors, environment and heredity, are interrelated. That means they both influence a child's growth and development. Okay, as we move on into content in Chapter 7, it discusses at the beginning more about how you would begin if you were going to open a child care program. The first thing you would need to do, or one of the first things most definitely, would be to obtain a license. And each state has their own guidelines, but there are also federal regulations. So those are important things that you would do in the beginning. You would also need to be looking for qualified teachers. And I usually stop here and talk a little bit about the qualifications for teachers in early child care settings. You all are getting qualified right now in the program at North Georgia Tech. You guys, based on the information that you shared in, or that's in Banner Web about you, most of you are working toward an associate's degree, or at least at this point that's what you have indicated. And that means that's going to give you several different avenues as far as jobs once you finish this program. And then if you choose to go on and work with students kindergarten and up, you would be working, you would need to have a bachelor's degree, which is a 4-year degree, so you would need to go on to another program. My suggestion is go on and get in the field with that associate's degree, be working as a paraprofessional or whatever. You know, there are a lot of different options, and we can discuss that at more. You can ask me or Miss Kelly Smith, which is our program director. She's your advisor, and some of you even have her as an instructor, so she would be a great person to talk to about what you want to do and how to get to where you want to, how to meet your goal and to become qualified. Okay, back to what early childhood programs need. They look, another thing that you all would, and we talked about this when we talked about our rules, is staffing ratios. The ratio of staff members to students, those numbers are important. We had 2 questions on our rules assignment at the beginning about staffing ratios. One of them had to do with nap time, if you remember that one. There again, you would have to look at the rules to make sure you're following that guideline. The program curriculum that you would use would be GELDS in the state of Georgia. Have you guys ever heard of DAP, Developmentally Appropriate Practices? If you are in 1101 right now, I am sure you have heard about DAP because it is discussed really a good bit in 1101. That's a large part of that curriculum. But DAP is, like I said, developmentally appropriate practices. It is imperative, this is what DAP says, I got this straight out of the book, that learning environments and enriching opportunities be provided for children. Now, as a part of health services, if you had a child care center, you would have to set up policies and procedures, maintain health and safety records, the training of personnel to administer first aid and emergency care, which is why that's a requirement for this course, that you all receive CPR and first aid training, because once you get in the field, you're going to have to do it anyway. It is imperative that as a part of the health care or the health services, that your center provides a clean, safe opportunity for students both indoors and outdoor environments. You would need to, as a center, develop emergency response plans. And there is a checklist, 7-1, that you, as an early childhood educator, should know what to do in order to be prepared for an emergency. You would also, as a part of health services for your center, need to plan for health, safety, and nutrition education for not only the students, but also for the staff. Okay, as moving on, what are the basic records that Georgia child care programs are required to maintain? Well, our book gives us the examples of the following that are records. Now, our specific requirements for Georgia is something we would need to look up, but this is a general list from our textbook. Children's health assessments, attendance, emergency contact information, and there is an example of an emergency contact form on figure 7-1 in the textbook. Developmental profiles of the students, staff health assessments, fire and storm drills, and there's a list, it's a teacher checklist, 7-3. You would need to keep a record of injuries and daily health checks. We talked about those in Chapter 2. Georgia does not require them in the same way that the book discusses, but that is something that other states may require. Guidelines for safe environments. Now, as a part of a high-quality child care program, you want to provide a safe environment for the children. Okay, again, I'm going to point out a checklist, 7-4, page 185. Guys, I'm going to continue to be pointing out checklists. Some of them are called tables. That might be a graphic or a chart. There are a lot of those in Chapter 7 and 8 that I will be referring to. I didn't write them out in the lecture notes because I want you to be sure you look at them as you read through the content in those chapters. Please look at these checklists that I'm speaking of, because our assignments that we're going to be doing that covers our course competencies, we will be looking more specifically at these things that I'm pointing out. Again, indoor safety, there's a checklist 7-4, page 185. Most of the time the checklists are either in a blue, green, yellow box. Then there's graphics and visuals. There are a lot in these two chapters that I want you guys to really pay attention to. There's an outdoor safety checklist on page 191, which is 7-5. And then another thing that is discussed toward the end of Chapter 7, and there's several pages there that discusses transportation. You are going to have children coming to a child care center, and they're going to be transported. I don't know if that's the proper way to say it. They're going to be transported, by car most of the time, and it depends on what the situation is in the place that you work. They may be transported by bus. But there are, for children at certain ages, especially birth through 5, there are child restraint laws in Georgia that must be followed. And there are rules in our rules for the child care learning centers about how those children need to be put in the car at the end of the day and how they need to be gotten out of the car. I know that's tricky, but you've got to make sure that the child is safely transported to the child care center. And believe it or not, that can be a big issue because not all parents have them in the proper child care seat. I don't think it's called a child care seat. I mean the car seat. I'm sorry. Anyway, the final part of Chapter 7 that I wanted to point out to you is on pages. There's information on page 196 and 197. There's a blue box, and it's a great list for families to help them identify the characteristics of a high-quality child care program. For any of you that have children birth through age 5, that would be a great list for you to look at as you try to decide how you want your child cared for in a child care setting. If you have to, go outside the home, most of us do because we have jobs. I have worked outside the home. I've been a stay-at-home mom. I've pretty much done depending on, I've got 3 children, I've done a little bit of both. I've worked full-time, I've worked part-time, and I've been a full-time at-home mom. But I have had to look for child care programs and child care settings. I chose for my children, at least many years ago now, because my boys are in their 20s, an at-home daycare at that time for them. And then later, my mom retired when my daughter was a birth through age 5 child, and my mother was able to stay at my home. And I will have to admit that that was probably the best setting for me because my mom helped me out around the house a lot, and that was a real good situation. But not everybody has that option. So that's a good checklist. Anyway, like I said, please pay attention to the checklist. We're going to be doing a project where you all will be choosing a playground. 1 playground per person. You guys will be looking at the playground. You will be using a checklist, which you will be provided with, and you will be looking at that playground to determine if it's a safe playground for children and if it's maintained properly. And like I said, again, in those rules for child care learning centers, there's some information there that we can refer to as well. There's also information in our textbook that tells us what the expectations are for playground safety. At the very end of Chapter 7, there's a little box, and it's on table 7-3, and it talks about, actually that's not the one I was referring to, it talks about equipment. There's even a table, I didn't mention this one, but it talks about poisonous plants that you need to avoid. And these plants, children can come in contact with these plants on the playground most of the time. And I guess that would be the main place. But like if you're on a field trip with the children, so of course you don't have to be a biologist to know the plants. But anyway, the figure that I was referring to, I'm sorry, was checklist, teacher checklist 7-6, and it's on page 192. It talks about sandbox care and maintenance. One of the places that I worked, it was a pre-K center. It also housed Head Start. The classroom that I taught in was a partnership Head Start pre-K class, and on that playground there was a sandbox. So depending on what playground you visit, you may see a sandbox. So there are guidelines for how to maintain it. There's also information about how to safely wear a helmet, because children that are in some settings might be riding tricycles and they have to wear helmets. Okay, that's all for Chapter 7. I'm going to stop now and start another video for Chapter 8. See you in a little bit.